everyone. Welcome back to Spinning a Better Yarn for 2022. Starting off the year with, I think what's going to be a great panel discussion with Indigenous students of linguistics. I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes. By the way, my name is Ruth Singer. I'm a member of the organising committee. The main thing is if you could keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, and for the panel discussion, audience members, if you could turn off your videos, please. And then we're going to hear from the panel of linguistics students for about 45 minutes or so. And if you keep the videos off for that, and then we'll have a general discussion. So please turn your videos back on for that. And if you have questions and whatnot, just save them until we get to that second part of the session. I think that's all the notes I need to give you. I'm going to hand over to Jakelin Troy now.
Well, I'm going to say Warami from Gumbaynggirr country. I'm on the North Shore of Sydney today. And I want to send a big call out to everybody in flood affected areas. My heart goes out to you. And I know that our elders past and present would be with you, standing in solidarity, seeing you through what you're going through. I'd like to acknowledge our community and our younger generations as well. We will be hearing from the Indigenous community of linguists today, again, as we work towards decolonising our discipline. And I know that all our communities, past and present, are with us on this journey. So as you introduce yourselves, panelists, and also when people are asking questions, if you could just give a bit of a shout out to the country you're on, acknowledging where you are. We're very fortunate to live in this amazing place. Let's keep it amazing. So today's theming, and Lesley Woods and I are going to be chairing this session together today, but Lesley's not feeling 100%. So I'll do the talking for the moment, and then I'll pass. Oh, sad face, poor thing. Anyway, so I'll just say that, so today we've got this amazing panel to talk to you, who've all got different experiences in this wonderful world of linguistics, language work, being in our languages, for our languages, advocacy and analysis, all of those wonderful things that we do as people who love our languages. And earlier in our Spinning a Better Yarn sessions, we've included Indigenous participants who are currently studying linguistics at both the undergraduate and postgraduate level. So this is giving them a bit more space and a bit more voice today. A number have talked about how they don't always feel comfortable in the university and in linguistics. In fact, while we were waiting to start today, we had exactly that conversation about how to create safe spaces where we can actually be ourselves and say what we need to say about our discipline, and also about the things that matter to us about our languages. An important part of decolonising linguistics is to make it a place in which Indigenous students feel respected and valued. And I think students and early career people of all ages are really in need of this kind of support. I think it's really important that we, as a discipline area, wrap around them. And I mean everybody who does language work, who is in this kind of real world of keeping our languages strong. And this means that our discipline must not acknowledge Indigenous people's authority in their languages and cultural knowledge. Linguistics as a discipline must also acknowledge the harm that's been done and continues to be done. For example, when non-Indigenous linguists maintain control over Indigenous languages that they work on. And believe me, this is not only something in Australia. I'm working with an international Indigenous student at the moment. And the book that we were looking at just yesterday starts with, Oh, look, you can't really criticize what I've written about these languages. This is in the 1880s, because, I was taught by illiterate peasants, and what can I really get from them? And these are actually his language community, the illiterate peasants. And what's worse were the translators weren't much better. They were also kind of useless illiterates from outside the community, but still Indigenous. And I just think, there is this kind of world where we as Indigenous people are still seen as the subjects of linguistics, not so much the researchers ourselves. So it's quite interesting reading through these examples from all over the world where, and that, that is from the 1880s, but there are still people who hold this view that somehow we are not really knowledgeable about our languages or how they work. We just are the subjects to collect data from. In this session, Indigenous students will talk about what changes might need to take place for linguistics to meet these goals. And I can also say that there are many, in fact, I'd say everybody in this audience are probably already signed up to not living the 1880s past and are with us into the future. So I'm just going to hand over to Lesley now, who's done a huge amount of work around the ethics in this area, and also looking at how to explain linguistics, complex linguistics, to her own community. Thank you, Lesley.
Yamagara from Yempa Nguramba. I'm here on Yempa country at Roto, New South Wales, on a station called Mwonga. This is a property that our mob bought about 15 years ago now, and I'm privileged enough to be living out here and working from here. A part of my role out here is now a ranger as well as a community linguist. So I just feel very, very blessed. I also feel very blessed to be a part of this discussion today, and I'm really happy to have a space where Indigenous students from university, undergraduate and other places have an opportunity to talk about their experiences. I've talked a lot about my experiences in the past, and a lot of people know where I stand and where I come from, and I'm very happy to support the voices of others who want to have something to say in this space. So I'll hand over now to the rest of the group, of the panelists. So
thanks, Lesley.
First introducing.
Thanks, Lesley. In fact, that's something we didn't discuss was an order, or did we? And I missed that bit. But I was thinking maybe we should start with Sharon, if that's okay. Sharon Edgar-Jones.
Thanks, Jaky. Yeah, so my name is Sharon. I'm a Wanarruwa and Gringo woman. Gringo from the Yarra River region, and Wanarruwa from the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales. My language journey commenced in 2009 when I was confronted with a grammar of my mother's language. And I spent many years unpacking this salvage grammar and repacking it in a community-friendly book. Part of the work I've been doing is researching and analysing historical data pertaining to the language area. Currently working with Dr. Jim Wafer and Albert Bergman, both wonderful, wonderful linguists who have nurtured and supported me throughout my journey. And I'm working with Muurrbay Aboriginal Language and Culture Cooperative as a senior language worker at the moment. So I'll let somebody else have a go now. Cheers.
Sorry, muted. You'd think I'd have that worked out after 2 years. No, I'm just going to throw to Debbie Ballangarry now to keep that kind of.
Yeah, Gunditjmara, that's my boss, by the way. I've got about 26 hours doing some work on my own language, which is an honour and a privilege. I'm a student at CDU university. And my big push of actually trying to do this was my father wouldn't let us learn language, even though he knew it. He actually knew it all. So it's been a big push since learning the Garang language on some of the language that I sit on, which I sit on Muurrbay land. So, or Muurrbay Baraga. Baragu. Oh, I was going to say it wrong today. Now I've gotten nervous. But anyway, I'll talk to you all during later. So Yarrung.
And maybe we should change pace and go to another part of Australia. Joel.
Thanks, Jaky. Yeah, yanga Arrernte mabla kana napanam. Arrernte chana kuna Joel Liddle Perrurle, Arrangi chana naka Liddle Perrurle, and Napali chana ala naka Emily Perkins Muurrbay. So my name's Joel Liddle Perrurle. My grandfather was a Arrernte man named Harold Liddle, and my Billy, which is my father's mother, was Perkins, Emily Perkins. My mother's actually a Linguist, which is a non-Aboriginal person from across the seas, across the waters, English-Irish background. And the Changatui area, Gunditjmara, Ilk Mukatui, Barntukatui, and Romanakatui Elk. So they're the countries that I come from. And Barntukatui is the name for Alice Springs. Ilkma is the name for Bond Springs, which is a station north of Alice. And Arrernte, or Uramina, when it's poorly pronounced, is my nana's mother's country. You might know the setting from the film Sweet Country. So, yeah, I'm a PhD student at the University of Melbourne, and I'm researching the link between cultural continuity, positive identity, and how positive identity and traditional learning enhances mental health. And also what the key knowledges are that each young person needs to learn for the purposes of improving their self-esteem and therefore their mental health outcomes. Currently undertaking qualitative interviews with senior leaders in our region. We call our elders, the term is Ngarapat. And I'm also interviewing young men. I work with young men. And many of these interviews are in Arrernte or Untitled. And a major theme from these interviews is the importance of everyone from our community, whether they're raised in town or in bush remote communities or outstations, speaking and nurturing our languages, and to learn to read and utilise the current orthographies that have been created for the purposes of building resources, basically to ensure our desert languages remain strong forever. So that's a little bit about me, and I can tell you more as we go on in the conversation.
Thank you, Joel. I'll use the language of Sydney, even though it's not my own language. It's one that I've had a fair bit to do with, but I'll say Didgeridoo, which is the way mob here. So thank you. I don't know if it's similar to up your way. Is it, Sharon? Didgeridoo, they say for thank you.
So actually I just came across on one of the historical word lists that I'm working on at the moment, previously unknown lists that was turned up in some papers in Melbourne. It was the first time I've seen the word thank you written.
That's interesting in a historical list, because it's not something we normally do, is greetings or thank you.
Right. Yes, it was Jakelin with his missionary.
Oh yeah, Jakelin, yeah.
Natia.
Natia, okay.
Yeah, it's the word that was recorded there, but I don't know if he's constructed that or if it was a genuine word at the time, yeah.
Well, Natia for that. Now we're going to move back over to near my country, Corey.
Hello. Kalamara, I think they say. Thank you. Arrernte.
Alaganel.
I'm Corey. I'm here in Adelaide. Ganai. Yeah, I'm a linguist, singer-songwriter. My mother too comes from across the ocean. My mum comes from Belgium. And my father, through my father's my Aboriginal heritage. So I'm the first generation born in Australia on my mother's side, a couple thousand generations on my father's side. And as Jaky kind of mentioned, I've got ties to a few different groups across Victoria, including the Gunditjmara, Ganai Mukjarawaint. And yeah, I'm just learning all languages as much as I can about any language really, and trying to revive my own Gunditjmara language. And one of the main ways I do that is through music and song. And I think that's a good way of kind of emulating what we used to do in the olden days. We would store all our knowledge in song, you know. That's kind of what I try to do with my music. Would you?
So I think that's our panel. Is that right? Have I missed anybody in the group, Lesley?
No, I don't think so, Jaky. I think that's everybody.
Okay, well, look, thank you all for your introductions. And I think in many ways what you've started to say kicks off this conversation. I don't know what's got into my cat, but it seems to want, thank you, sorry. I've at the end of the whole online, maybe this is the end of it, but suddenly I've got a feral animal in my life. So anyway, so I think what I'm hearing, I like the way Sharon started off with that you were confronted by the grammar of your mother's language, Wanarruwa, I'm guessing, yeah. So it's
if you've got time for a story, I'll
well, that's where we're heading now. We want to hear the story of the confrontation and how you unpacked it and created something that your own community can actually use.
So in 2009, I was caring for my terminally ill mother in her home. And one day she had me cleaning out the cupboards in the bedroom. And in the back of the cupboard, I found this book. And I said, Mum, what's going on? What's this book doing in the cupboard? I'd never seen it before. And she told me a story, how 2 years prior to that, my nephew had wanted a tattoo, and he'd wanted the tattoo to read blood is thicker than water, and he'd wanted it in language. And Mum didn't have the words to give him for that tattoo. And she told me that it wasn't really until Caden, my nephew, had requested a sentence from her that she started to think about language loss. And she became pretty angry with herself for being so complacent all of her life about the fact that she didn't have more than a handful of words. And when it boiled down to it, she didn't even know if those words were her words. As happens on the East Coast, we tend to words shift around, and so she didn't know. And she was talking to her elders group about this, and the elders decided they were going to go on an excursion to Muurrbay Aboriginal Language and Culture Co-op to talk to them about language. Mum was undergoing chemo at the time and was too ill to go on the excursion when it happened, and so she stayed at home. But the first book that the elders saw on the shelf when they walked in was this book. And they said, that's Floppy's language. We're going to buy that book for Floppy and we're going to give her language back. And so they did. They threw their money together. They brought the book. They went rushing back to Mum's. Mum was all Narragar on the lounge under a blanket, feeling sooky. And they went in and gave her the book. Said, here's your language, Floppy. They were all real happy. Mum was real happy. Mum was excited. sat down with the book and tried to construct a sentence for my nephew for the tattoo, and within 5 minutes had given up. And the book was in the cupboard, put the book into the cupboard, and there it was for 2 years when I found it. And so she said, yeah, make that sentence for your nephew. And I couldn't do it either. I couldn't understand the meta language, the linguistic jargon. It was well beyond me. I'd only completed year 10, and that had been some 30 years previously. So the book went back into the cupboard, and 6 weeks later, or thereabouts, Mum passed away. And I took the book out of the cupboard and went on a mission to get somebody to explain this to me, and to ask why. Why was it so hard? Why was this? This is our book, it's our language, and why was it locked in this treasure chest and bound in chains and embedded in concrete? And that's how it seemed from my perspective. It was completely inaccessible. I linked up with Muurrbay, who published the grammar, and over the years, they've supported me in gaining the skills that I've needed to unpack the grammar. Started off basically with a certificate 1, and then a certificate 2, and then a certificate 3 in languages, because that was all available. That was all that was available to me. I attended professional development workshops with what was then Resources Network for Linguistic Diversity. Was encouraged by Margaret Florey to consider university because I'd expressed the desire to be a real linguist. And but I was terrified of the thought of university. And I think a lot of people my age, because I'm nearly 60, are. But I tackled it and completed CDU's diploma in Indigenous language work, and coupled with that knowledge and under the guidance of Jimmy Wafer, who's an awesome linguist, and Albert Bergman, who was just a legend, I was able to pull this together. It took several years, but yeah, and it was written for my mum. And so my mum was of the generation who were apprenticed when they were children. Mum got to finish primary school, but she was 12, going on 13 when she was apprenticed, and never had the opportunity to get any further education. So I was writing the book for my mum and for the 300 or so family members that had a copy of this book under their beds or on their bookshelves or in cupboards, to bring the language out of the book and into our mouths. And I hope that I've achieved that. So that's it.
Well, that's a positive journey to being a student in linguistics out of a fairly frightening experience. I think that the way you describe that kind of fear of universities and fear of the education system in general is something that even people who have gone through and finished high school, you know, many want to do something, but linguistics is a kind of fearsome world. What do you reckon, Joel? What's been your experience of engaging with linguistics and linguists and being a student in this field?
Yeah, it's kind of again, I really enjoyed listening to that, Sharon. Thanks for sharing. Because for me, it was a personal journey as well. Like, I grew up in Melbourne and only visiting Central Australia from the time I was really young, and while my grandmother was still alive. And I remember as a kid, I'd see this old lady old Aboriginal lady, and she'd be talking in Arrernte. And I was kind of like, and you'd walk around the streets here in Alice, and language is still spoken in the street out in front of Coles. It's still dynamic here, although it's under pressure. You'd still hear it. People talk it in day-to-day conversations. And I'd go back to Melbourne, and I'd be like, hang on, there's this whole other side of me that I really want to learn about. And I'd look at my grandmother, who I looked up to a lot, and when she talked to her friends, and I was like, I think language always stuck with me in that way. And it was this a curiosity to really want to learn. And it wasn't until about the same time, Sharon, 2009, that I actually got serious, or pulled my socks up and thought, well, I need to go and learn this language, because it's nagging at me. And I'd watched the episodes of First Australians, particularly the episode 4, and I saw an old man named Yatla Stewart, who was talking in Arrernte, and he's one of my relations. And Dad said, oh, that's your relation they're talking. And Dad would always say words in Arrernte to me, but it wasn't in any fluent context. So what I basically did, I came back here, and I just started learning Arrernte. I bought every resource that I could. And I found, particularly with our senior people, Veronica Perrurle Dobson and Margaret Kamara Turner and Kathleen Kamara Wallace, a lot of our elders, particularly the old ladies, they were so welcoming and nurturing in that journey, because they were all good friends with my grandmother and remember my grandfather and stuff like that. And so I was kind of mentored by these old ladies who didn't really ask for anything other than a cup of tea. They never wanted me to pay them. They just wanted someone to come and learn. And in this region, we do have sometimes I'm quite inspired by a lot of the work that's happening on the East Coast, by the motivation there is in community to really take your language back and to reaffirm your language identity. And I'm inspired by that, because I think sometimes here in the desert, we do still have that complacency. We have language speakers and language speaking families, but then in town, I do wish that there was more effort, I guess, from people like me that have grown up in an English speaking home, to take back what's been taken from them, really. It's quite an empowering process. So, I haven't been trained in linguistics. I picked up linguistics along the way. To be honest, I didn't pay attention in English class in school, so I couldn't have told you what a verb or a noun was when I started picking up these dictionaries. And then, having to learn things like ablatives and associated motions and locatives. And I mean, I see my friend Jenny Green in there, and she's helping me with these relative clauses. And, if you really want to make your hair go grey, get into those subordinate clauses, is that it? But, all these linguistic tricks that we kind of need to, I guess, when you're starting from an English speaking background, it's impossible, but you do run into them, and you have to navigate your way through, well, what does this mean? Because you're essentially learning a language totally different from English. It's arranged totally differently. In Arrernte, you can have words and you can build them together. So, a few words creates an entire phrase, sentence, whatever, and you say it all at once. And it's quite fascinating, actually. So yeah, I first started engaging with Henderson and Dobson's Arrernte orthography, and then along the journey too, it also became for me about learning about where my grandfather came from and where my grandmother came from and who we were related to. And so I started engaging with ethnographic material from Spencer and Gillen, and later T.G.H. Strello. And a lot of these records, after I'd sort of, been through cultural business, I was able to work more with these records because a lot of them are highly restricted. But if you take T.G.H. Strello, for example, his records are almost entirely recorded in IPA diacritics. So he's written full familial genealogies and these types of things in diacritics. And I'm sure you linguistically trained folks know how hard it is to decode diacritics as well. So it's been something else I've had to learn along the way. You know, if you take then on the other side, Spencer and Gillen, who have a completely phonetic way, their own method of recording Arrernte, you know, trying to work out and decode what these records were saying it's been a lot of work, but a real journey in understanding, I guess, the richness of our languages, of desert languages, because yeah, you know, they're not just basic simple languages. They're so rich, and they're tied up with mythology, and they're tied up with family, and they're, you know, we still have our kinship language, Untitled, we call it kinship, and so we have the terms that we have to use based on our skin names for addressing each other, and understanding and learning all that sort of stuff has been it's been really interesting. I think you would never stop learning. So that's been my experience with linguistics. Yeah, I mean, I could keep talking, but I don't want to take up the whole forum. So if you have another question, feel free to ask, and I can explain a bit more.
Oh, thanks, Joel. The intensely personal experience of being an Aboriginal person doing linguistics, and I'm hearing a really nice affirmation to all the, I guess, non-Indigenous linguists in the group, that there are those of you out there who are holding our hands as we go through. I mean, I did do a PhD myself through ANU, and I had many people hold my hand as I went through at Sydney University as well. And in fact, I'd like to shout out to one man, Michael Walsh, while we're doing naming people, who has always been there for me since I was an undergraduate scholar. And I kept on with linguistics because it was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I wasn't going to let it beat me. I think I'm hearing that theming.
Well,
that's what both Sharon and Joel have said. Well,
absolutely. Sorry, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was just going to say, like, a lot of the, and I forgot to mention, when, I mean, in my postgrad studies, I was doing Indigenous knowledges, and I basically started downloading all of the Arrernte material I could from libraries about Arrernte language, and Dr. Jenny Green, Neil Broad, Jason Gibson, Dr. David Wilkins, and Dr. Miff Turpin, all these people have actually become good friends of mine and they're our colleagues and friends in this area and field. And so, yeah, they have held my hand along the way, and it's, yeah, good shout out to them too.
I might throw to Corey now, and I'm going to wind up with Debbie, because she's got some very particular views too about how the Academy has treated us in conversations, including online in linguistics. But Corey, over to you.
Is there a question? I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, I have listened with great interest to how you came into linguistics yourself, and of course you're a musicologist as well, and I think this intensely personal nature of doing linguistics, and how we also as Aboriginal people have to navigate community politics in a way that maybe non-Indigenous linguists don't need to. You've spoken very eloquently about that, and how we have to sort of, I think, you know, we're thinking here about authority. You know, in the initial introduction to the panel, we were talking about who has the authority to do research. So I think that you've got some very interesting opinions on that, Corey, if that was something that you'd like to address. But please tell us anything you'd like to about your experience of being a student in this remarkable discipline that we're in.
Yeah, okay. Well, I kind of stumbled into linguistics. It wasn't something that I intended to do, I started at CASM, which is the Centre of Aboriginal Studies in Music at the University of Adelaide. And that was probably a very safe, culturally safe and good entry point into university, into academia, you know. We had a lot of Aboriginal staff there. We would learn Western music, but we would also learn Inma from the Western Desert. We would have Anangal people come down and sing, and we would learn, it's all in Pinjara, Yankunyara. So that was just, and that program doesn't exist anymore. But to have those Aboriginal people, elders, come down and be given that respect in an academic setting, you know, to be put as a lecturer, and then learning from them, I think that was a really lucky experience that I got there. And then from that, I started to learn Pinjara language. And then it goes on and on and on. I went to psychology. That's where I started doing electives in linguistics. And I thought, oh, this is kind of fun, you know, I like this. I too didn't know what a noun was or a verb or any of this stuff. It was kind of like someone explained it. It's like maths, but with letters. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of fun for me. I like maths. And that kind of, so it was interesting because I was learning a language, Pinjara, and learning linguistics. And then when I come back to study linguistics in more detail, doing my master's, and I could speak Pinjara, everything I would learn, or I could, you know, yeah, I know what an ablative, I know what an allative, I know because in Pinjara, I know it, you know. We don't have it in English as suffixes anyway. So it was a different, becomes a tool, you know. The language itself becomes a tool for understanding linguistics. So that was almost functioning as another meta language for me, alongside the really jargonistic, linguistic terminology. And then that also, you know, then I've come to write songs. I want to write a song. I was going to write a song in Pinjara, which I've written some since, but someone said to me, why don't you write a song in your language, in your own language, you know? And that got me thinking, I don't know my language. I don't know. And I went to talk to my nan, and she could give me some words and stuff, little bits of language, a lot of Ganai language, but no like sentences and all this kind of, all those case markers and stuff. And I realized this is going to be a different process, you know, this is a different language journey, acquisition of a language which is no longer spoken, compared to learning a language where you can go and sit down with old people and learn it. You know, the colonial, since we're talking about decolonisation, the colonial impact is not there, you know, you're not learning through that colonial lens. You can learn in a more kind of traditional way. So I think personally having those two different experiences has been beneficial, particularly because they inform each other. Like if I want to say, write a song in Pinjara, I can take it to someone and say, is this right, Paya? And yes, they'll tell me you got to change this, but you can't do that in Gunditjmara language or in Ganai language. So that's kind of, I got an idea about revive with a neighbor, not a stranger. This is what I've done my master's thesis on. And that is because English is a stranger language, you know, and it's very different to Aboriginal languages. It doesn't have the case marking. It doesn't have all the free word order, all these different things, you know. So revive with a neighbor, if you learn a neighboring language, which is still spoken, you learn another Aboriginal language, you know, all Aboriginal languages in this country are at threat. All languages are in danger. Even when you think about, you know, the strong language, Yulungu Mata or Pindara, they still only got 3, 4, couple thousand speakers. And in big global terms, that's a very small language community. So when you learn that language, you're helping that language, and you also gaining a resource for yourself, so that when you look at your own language, when you're going through those historical records, you can see it with a different mindset, a different perspective. And there's so much similarity, you know, like all the linguists got these hypotheses about Pamanyungan and Proto-Australian and all these things, you know, we got a lot of shared language. And then it also comes to, when we get to that question of authority, it's tricky, man, because a lot of the stuff I'm working with is Howard, and he done a lot of tricky stuff, tricking people, you know, telling them that he was a lawman, and going and getting information that's not really for a general public. And yeah, knowing how to navigate that, and then even knowing a certain community might have lapsed their view and think, oh, that's okay to talk about now, you know, with that's okay. But another group might think of the same thing and say, no, you can't talk about that. So yeah, you got accountability to different groups. And it's tricky navigating because there's no consensus in the community, you know. Yeah, I don't want to keep going. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Corey. That is really speaking in many ways, isn't it, to what is actually even the purpose of the discipline of linguistics. And Debbie asked the question, what even is a linguist? And who are linguists? I think in a chat that we were in at one point, and I wickedly pointed out that there's a trade certificate called a PhD in linguistics that I'd like to see more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have, but it's not essential, but it is what it is. But then there are all these other people, like the story so far is of people falling into linguistics, which in many ways I did myself. Wasn't really where I planned to end up. In fact, I might have got a PhD in visual arts if I'd really done what my heart was telling me to do. But anyway, linguistics, here we are. Debbie.
Even that name has changed, you know, linguist. Like at one time it used to mean like a polyglot. A linguist was someone who could speak lots of languages, but now it's changed to like,
That's right. Yeah, philologists and others. Right, Debbie.
Okay, yeah, I kind of fell into it at the same time, but it was something I've always wanted to learn. Like I remember in 2000 and when my language was actually, when they first started teaching Gumbaynggirr, I was so excited I wanted to go home. But of course I couldn't afford to go home. I had bills, I had all of these responsibilities. So to give up a year and go home and learn my language was impossible back in, what was it? What year was that? I'm just trying to remember it now. 1999, I think it was. And I couldn't afford to go home. So I was really upset that I now have this opportunity to learn the language that I've been wanting to do since I was a little kid, that now I couldn't. So there was like a barrier for me. And then when they decided to do Cert 1 in Garang up here in Jaky country, in Jaky, I was sitting there thinking, well, hey, you know, like I'll go and learn, and hopefully then maybe I'll be able to learn and have a look and be able to teach myself the language, since I'd already had the dictionary, and I'm thinking I could do this, this can happen. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, but I'm looking and I open the dictionaries and I'm going, I don't know this. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how that's said, you know. And being a dyslexic and neurodiverse type person, my brain just went into overload, couldn't process. And like everybody else said, you know, I didn't even know what a noun, any of those things were. So it was really hard. But then my cousin suggested where to work, because I come back from a background of, I come from a trauma, like I worked in out of home care and child protection and worked with communities, like in not-for-profits, in healthcare centres. So I've seen it from the other side of things, of like how things can, how mob not connected to language can be. So when I came to the uni, I'm thinking, this is great. It's fantastic. I'll go to the uni. And all of a sudden I felt like the dumbest person in the room. Like I felt really, like I felt like they'd set me up to fail, is how I felt. I've actually pushed myself time and time again, but it's like I didn't get a linguistic tutor for my linguistics section, and I only barely passed, you know, like, and I still feel that horribleness on it, because I needed time for a dyslexic person to kind of process it a little bit further, but you've in this limited. And then of course COVID hit, and I enrolled in a specific where we would go and do bachelor, which I was told that we were going to be at block units, and we'd do all the assignments there, and everyone would be there for me. So it was like this other level of backup. And then you go and try and apply. Like I'm a 50-year-old woman, you know, like, and here I've got a house, I've worked hard my whole life, got my own house, and I've got all these bills to pay. So, you know, like at this stage in my last part, like I'm on financial hardship, you know, like at this part, but I'm still going, because I'm thinking, oh, I have come this far. I've only got 6 more months to go, and I've come through like different levels. But I really felt like the way that even the marking, even the structures, everything about the some part of it, it needs to decolonize. Even the way, and I've got my one of my tutors in the room, swapping tutors all the time, no consistency. But one of my tutors in the room is Brandon, and like we were working and we were struggling in some of the sections of some of the uni. In one of our papers, he had said to me that should have been marked higher. I was happy to get a pass, but I still struggled with the fact that ultimately the outcome of this was to do it, to give you some background. And I know I've spoken about it in my lecture. We just don't see eye to eye, and that's okay. And I love her, nothing against her. And I felt like they wanted a defined outcome, but my outcome wasn't the outcome that they wanted. My outcome said that this cannot have a language maintenance program going forward, because you've got people that have got all of this, as Corey said, all of this stuff on the ground that's happening. And like, and with that particular language, this is, oh God, you've started me. Sorry, you've opened the can of worms now. I don't know if I'm going to stop. But like, then I'm trying to get the mob here and talk to the mob. I'm not allowed to help with language revitalisation from the mob here, because I'm not Muurrbay, even though I have connections to here. And that's not on anyone. That's their community rule, and I understand that. But I'm sitting there going, sitting in a school, wanting these little kids in the school just to have language, just to have some sort of language in their school. For that school in particular, and I'm sorry, I realised I'm getting a bit louder, but for that school in particular, it's taken the principal 7 years, and it's taken me 3 years to get actually a list of words that they approved in that school. Because of, and I'm going to say it, because of black, we call it gatekeeping, black politics, whatever you want to throw at it. I'm going to sit there and say, like, this little school with mostly Aboriginal kids in the school is suffering. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. But however, so then I've gone and put this paper in, and I've gotten marked, and it was like they still hadn't heard the Aboriginal voice, because they had a target, because I didn't meet the target of being able to produce this language outcome. Now on this, then this same paper for me, on this same paper, they said, well, you didn't hit the mark. And I said, it's really funny, because I actually got a teacher, because they said, you didn't read through it. And I said, actually really funny, because I got a teacher, and I got the teacher to read the report before me submitting it, because this is what I was taught to do. So I got her to read it, and she understood perfectly what I was trying to say without even, but it was just the differences in the worlds. So I found that working in these two worlds, doing uni, struggled. I mean, I can remember the time when I rang up Paula, who's in the room, and I cried because I couldn't even write. I personally could not write 100 words. So I was like struggling and overwhelmed, and still am. And I often say the phrase that I will never write a paper because I struggle so much in the construction, because everybody thinks like dyslexia. Okay, so they think that you can't read and write. Well, I have the version of dyslexia, which is actually being able to construct sentences, you know, and it's just like, for me, it's just been struggle trying to get tutors, trying to get the right people to match me, to have a mentor, somebody that's going to encourage me to go through. And mind you, I did go to uni with Sharon and my cousin Kerry Ann, who was my driving push to come to university. Now my cousin is not coming back because we said, yes, let's go do this together and have 2 Gumbaynggirr. What a great thing. And I'm thinking I'm going to take that, like, I'm not being offensive here, right, you fellas, just so that you know. I'm going to take that white man's job is what I'm thinking. Then we'll have somebody from our own mob and I'll be able to go there, and I get there and I go, I'm not going to take that person's job. I'm going to go somewhere else and help other mob. That's how I think. But ultimately, like, that was for me like massive. And like, no matter where I've gone, I've always tried to use the words of the country to say hello, like just basically hello in language, like even on the Aboriginal services. And everyone just goes, why are you doing that for? And it's like, well, that's how we said it. That's how we say it. Why shouldn't we say it? Why shouldn't we have it in our businesses to do this? Why shouldn't we have this in our Aboriginal organisations? Then, like, for me, I'm thinking, like, as I said, I come from an out-of-home care perspective. They have these cultural plans for our kids that are in out-of-home care, and how we can actually reconnect them. Like, my passion will be to try and get on board with like ABSEC and getting them to make sure that there are programs for kids in schools. My rant, but I'm just saying, that's how I see it, is like, kids are our thing. I don't have kids, so the language stops with me. Like, that's a personal, that's a whole personal trauma thing. But that's why I started TikTok, because I was told by Steve, to someone get on TikTok and start learning Gumbaynggirr. And now all of a sudden I'm getting all these people yelling out Ginnegay, you know, just Ginnegay, you mob, you know, like, and like, it's a little thing, but it's important. But I'm telling them to reconnect. I've had so many people in that community on the online sphere actually wanting to reconnect to their language. And I get it wrong. I always own it. But like, I've got a young girl that's now inspired to go off to uni, and she's actually going to CDU. But I just found that the system itself, it sort of kind of needs to come down a little bit more, because the one thing I hate on my record right now is I want to learn the phonetic section of uni again. Just the one, what I call the IAS 163 at CDU. But I would like to learn it again, because I still felt like there's bits that I would probably take in now because of my processing ability. So even though I learned Garang 5 years ago, some of that still didn't come through until today. So, and limited and scared, not knowing. Career Trackers, classic, another example of like just the failing. Career Trackers is an Aboriginal employment agency that works with all universities to encourage people to go out into universities. And so I thought, great, I'll be able to earn some money here. And then they turned around and they wanted to put me in an admin job. And I'm going, I don't want to be in an admin job. I want to be somewhere in a language centre helping. And their excuse was, well, hang on, we can't do that. I'm like, but I'm telling you where to go. Well, if you want to create your own job, there's no point us helping you. And I'm thinking, this is not right. How is this right? And then even these scholarships of trying to get scholarships, there's no scholarships for our field, none. I'm at the moment in the process of working with a friend that's a millionaire. He's got a millionaire mum, and they give out money to all these charity organisations to tell him to please think about scholarships at uni with not this $2,000. $2,000 doesn't even pay my mortgage for 3 months. It doesn't do that. So it's just like, these are the practicalities for people going to university, of like, this is the real life. You know, and it's like, and me trying to tell people, and now I can see why mob want to give up in the first year. I can see why mob do. And if that's the stats, and trying to get somebody in such a scientific field, you know, then how are we going to achieve that unless we start changing that sort of stuff, like the real stuff? Sorry, Brent, I'll shut up now in case anyone has any questions.
No, look, that's a good place to end, is how do we get our people supported if they want to do formal studies. There are scholarships at that more senior level for PhDs particularly, not very many, but there are. But to get people through the first few years of university, or even to finish high school, is a challenge. So look, I'm going to say thank you to the speakers, and we're going to throw open the floor. But before I do, and we would like to hear particularly from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or other Indigenous linguists, scholars who are amongst us. That is not to be disrespectful to any of the, I hate using this Indigenous but the non-Indigenous members of our community online here, but just to give some free air, if you like, open air for an Indigenous point of view on what our panel has shared. And look, Didjari to all of you. They're really great insights. Lesley, before I go further, did you want to make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, I do. I just want to thank all the panelists, and I want to comment about the common theme, and you've touched on it a few times, Jaky, and that is we all come into linguistics from a very personal place, and we all come in with our trauma around, the colonisation process and losing language and losing culture and all of those things. And we come into a system, when we come into the university, that has not ever catered for us in our current, kind of where we're at and why we're doing linguistics. So it's a really ill fit to begin with. We come in as the subjects, as the people who are studied, and we come in that way. It's not recognised that is not a fit in the university system. There's no place for Indigenous people to kind of be scholars in the same space that non-Indigenous linguists look at Indigenous languages. We look at it in a completely different way. So I just wanted to make that point. And I think that's probably speaks to what everybody on the panel was saying today, as they come from this really personal place. That's my own space as well. I come in to linguistics in the same way because I wanted to know about my language, because I wanted to unlock it, as Sharon says. We have to learn linguistics because unless we're in a really fortunate position of having speakers to learn from, we have to learn linguistics to unlock our languages. So I think that's the kind of really difficult place where there is no kind of space, I suppose, made in universities for that. And that until recently, I guess, and that's what this conversation is about. How do we make that space, and how do we support Indigenous people to become linguists, not for the sake of becoming linguists, and maybe they want to become for the sake of becoming linguists because they've got a real passion for linguistics, but to learn about their languages, to work on their languages, and to have authority over their languages in a space where non-Indigenous people have authority over our languages. Linguists work with our languages, and then by default end up with the authority in our language. So we're at this really awkward kind of place, and I think that's where we're at the moment. That was coming through quite a lot for me in those conversations we just had. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you, Lesley. Right, so over to you, particularly, as I said, to start off with the Indigenous members of our group today.